Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Squadron Leader Benjamin Chaffee. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. And during this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Alfred Anders. Alfred Anders was born in 1890, the youngest son of Charles and Ellen Anders of Moama, Victoria. His father worked various jobs, including as a labourer and as a drover. He was a violent drunk and eventually deserted the family when the children were small. In 1898, during one of Charles's rare visits to the family home, in Echuca, the former weatherboard house caught fire and burned to the ground. The family received help from many in the community to recover. Alfred was educated at the Echuca State School and went on to work as a butcher in the Echuca and Benalla districts. In 1913, Alfred Anders married Agnes Thompson from Barrelneld, and they had a daughter, Alvie, the following year. Agnes's health began to fail when Alvie was just a small baby, and in early 1915, she contracted typhoid fever. Agnes Anders died in February 1915, leaving Alfred a widower with a 9-month-old baby to look after. Perhaps overwhelmed by his loss, less than a fortnight later, Alfred left Alvie with his mother and enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. Anders left Australia in May 1915 with reinforcements to the 23rd Infantry Battalion. He was first sent to Egypt, where he was joined by his older brother Arthur, who had enlisted from Queensland. Arthur was able to transfer to Alfred's battalion, and they would go on to Gallipoli together. The Anders brothers arrived in Gallipoli after the major fighting of the last offensive had died down. In late October, Arthur was wounded in the leg and evacuated a hospital, leaving Alfred to stay on Gallipoli until the evacuation. After getting back to Egypt, Alfred transferred to the 6th Machine Gun Company and continued training in the desert for several months before coming to France. He initially served as a driver in the company, but after being kicked by a horse and suffering a badly damaged knee, he requested to revert to private. Alfred Anders' first experience of warfare on the Western Front came at Pozières in July and August 1916. He later described how, "Myself and other gunners were in a small dugout when a 5-foot 9-inch high explosive shell hit the roof, and away it went. A dull thud, a bright red flash, blue stars, smoke and dust, and broken timber hitting our steel hats was a sensation we got. It seems marvellous that none of us were hit at all, for if the shell had hit the end or gone through the roof without bursting, we would have been blown to atoms." Anders lost his belongings in the blast, writing, "I did not wait to look for them when I got out of the wreckage." After the Australian battalions left Pozières, they were sent to Belgium to recover and acquire a section of the line. During this time, Alfred's brother Arthur had been working to be transferred to his brother's unit. He joined Alfred in the 6th Machine Gun Company in October 1916, just as it was being sent to the Somme. Less than a month later, the 6th Machine Gun Company took part in an attack on the Somme. Alfred Anders remained in reserve while his brother went forward. His brother was sent forward with a gun crew to assist on the 7th Brigade's attack on Bayonet Trench. Private Arthur Anders was killed with 4 others in a shell fire whilst waiting to be relieved. Alf went forward to bury his brother's body, but was unable to do so because of the ongoing shell fire. One of the officers killed with Arthur was the 3rd brother in his family to be killed in action. Perhaps as a result of this, Alfred was kept behind the lines for most of the fighting at Fleur, following the death of his brother. Alfred was relatively matter-of-fact about what he called his exceptionally unfortunate and sad circumstances, but wrote, "It is a consolation to know that he suffered no pain and that he could not have died a more noble death than to the cause of right and freedom. It is the will of the Lord, and we must abide with it at all times." Alfred Anders spent a considerable amount of time in hospital in 1917. First, it was further problems with his knee, and later in the year, he was struck by a shell fragment and wounded in the arm. He spent Christmas 1917 in London on leave, and the first 3.5 months of 1918 training on Salisbury Plain. By the time Alfred Anders was ready to return to the front in April 1918, the machine gun companies had reorganised, and he was made a member of the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion. On the 8th of August, the Australian Corps played a central role in launching the Great British Offensive that would be known as the Battle of Amiens. The 2nd Machine Gun Battalion played an important part of the advance, which captured an unprecedented amount of ground, enemy prisoners and material. From that point until the end of the war, the machine gun battalions were in regular rotation as the infantry ground back the enemy, slowly pushing the Germans back towards the Hindenburg Line. By early September, the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, attached to the 7th Brigade, had advanced to the village of Arlon. During the early hours of the 3rd of September, they were dealing with resistance from a few large but isolated parties of German soldiers. At some point during the series of encounters, Private Alfred Anders was shot in the abdomen. He was carried out to the 41st Casualty Clearing Station, where he died of his wounds on the 4th of September 1918. The war ended just 5 weeks later. Alf Anders is buried at Heath Cemetery, Arbonniere, where his remains lie today under the words, "There is a link death cannot sever. Fond remembrance clings forever." His brother Arthur is buried 30 kilometres away with the same epitaph. Their mother was left to raise Alvy alone. The names of the Anders brothers are listed in the roll of honour here on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed here today beside the pool of remembrance. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Alfred Anders, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.